I am Suku Sengupta, the Director for Center for Indic Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this unique event, first of a kind event that the Center is doing, that is an official book launch. We are launching or releasing this book. It's called The Naked Philosopher as the Intuitive Self, and it is written by Mr. Balakrishna Naipaul. I know many of you attended his lecture yesterday. Fascinating, spellbinding lecture where he combined history of the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny, or India's first war of independence, with philosophy, with scriptures, personal anecdotes, personal family history, and all that extemporaneously for an hour. So that was amazing. But for those of you who may not have had the chance to listen to him yesterday, let me introduce him. Mr. Naipaul hails from Trinidad, the Caribbean island of Trinidad, after his schooling, and his schooling also was very interesting in the sense that he walked out of his so-called the school that his parents sent him to. But anyway, he went to England for higher studies. He stayed back in England for some time, got involved with the socialist movement that was perhaps at its heyday at that time, got a chance to personally and intimately interact with Bertrand Russell. After that kind of an activist time, he decided to move to Canada, and he came to Canada, settled as an academic, but for a variety of reasons, constellation of events, he decided to change paths, and he went to the United Nations, kind of an NGO work. After doing that for some years, he began as an editor. He was editor of a newspaper. After some time with that endeavor, he decided to relinquish all that and devote full time to writing. And since then, he has written close to 10 books, some of which are on display on the front table. And as you can see from the list of books, they span a very wide range. But today is a special day because his book that we will be releasing, this is his first non-fiction book. So the earlier books are all fiction and poetry. So the way we will do this event is, I will request very soon Mr. Naipaul to talk about what inspired him to write this book and how this book is a little different from let's say, a standard philosophy book that an academic in philosophy department might write. So after that, we will have two speakers who will read selected passages from the book, and then we'll have a Q&A. So with that, I invite Mr. Balakrishna Naipaul to come and speak us about this book.
The question about this book, why did I jump to philosophy after spending so many years writing fiction and poetry? After all, my first love was to write poetry. As a student, even as a teenager, I wrote a lot of poetry. Whilst I was a student, I had decided within myself that I would write one poetry a day, one poem a day. So there, over my university life was about 6 years. And during that time, I have thousands of poems. But during that time, some were published in journals, and some came into book form. So there are two books of poetry during my time after graduation and so forth. And later on, it took on a different kind of form, which was sort of critiques really, in terms of what was happening around me. But along with these books, the period of writing poetry, there's a philosophical base that runs through it. And that is observed especially in the kind of friends I kept, the company I had during university. I think I was fortunate to be living in a time during my student life where there was so much debate going on about what is the future of our world. What does our world comprise of? Is it possible this world could be destroyed? So some of that, it touches on very, very physical qualities in terms of life. But as a Hindu, being brought up with the Vedas and looking at reality, especially when Sri Krishna talks about reality in the Bhagavad Gita, what is real and what is not real. And we can only know that by going deep into ourselves, which is perhaps something that I had that training from my father. So philosophy was part of my upbringing in a way, except when I began to read philosophy, formal philosophy, especially reading European philosophy, it was a different picture altogether, because here we have a lot of criticism. I remember one of the first philosophers I read was Immanuel Kant, and his famous book about reasoning. And when I remember reading that, and I wondered, does he really know what philosophy is? So I had the opportunity of discussing that with my person whom I befriended and became lifelong friends right up until he died, Bertrand Russell. And I asked him about that. So the page that I have here, which I'm going to read part of it, which is a reflection in terms of my discussion with him. From that discussion, what is philosophy? And this is a paraphrase, really, of what he has said to me. Yes. My aim, it says here, is to ask the question about what is the philosophy. But Bertrand Russell said that the purpose of philosophy is to clear up muddled confusion about how philosophers arrive at philosophy. To clear up muddled thinking. In other words, the question I had asked would aim directly at that. Is it possible that a great philosopher like Immanuel Kant had been engaged in muddled thinking? He thought so. So anyway, it goes on further than that. Philosophers should not concern themselves much with what is actually happening. Why should we not concern with what is happening? The layman this is what we do all the time. Why should philosophers not be concerned themselves with what is happening? That is a philosophical question, because what we see is not really what is. Now that's a big statement, but that is what comes from the Upanishads. Because life is changing, the universe is expanding, and what happens yesterday will not be happening today. We may see it going on and say, yes, but it is. I am here, I was there yesterday. But are we really? So this whole question of past, present, and future does not enter the picture at all. It is only relative. It makes sense to us in terms of the relativity, the same kind of relativity that Einstein talked about in terms of energy and mass. So it goes on further. The proper concern is with what is possible. What is possible? Now that's the big question that the yogis of ancient India struggle with. What is possible? Is it possible, for instance, for me to stop this mind from rambling on and on and on? Is it possible that I can actually go into myself and discover something that is different from what I consider myself? Is it possible that I can really come to that understanding of I am not my body. If I'm not my body, what am I? So these are questions, these are philosophical questions. Some may say they're religious questions. And there's a bit of religiosity in it too, insofar as religious teach us how to become philosophical. That is, if we listen and if we take in consideration what those great books are really trying to tell us. There's two parts to Vedas. How we live our lives, day-to-day lives, and the other side, some might say speculative. But that speculation is the real knowledge. That's why Socrates, when he was asked questions about what is happening here now, he said, I don't know. He said, I really don't know anything. But what did he mean by that? What we see and what we interpret as what is, he would say, I don't know. Because I am trapped in a mind state of perception that those perceptions might be absolutely wrong. Until I can be certain by going into myself and determining what is real from what is not real, then and only then can I be certain. But what might be certain to me isn't certain to you. We may never know until you have done the same that I have done, gone into myself. The methodology of that is meditation, or contemplation, as Westerners would say. You could not contemplate on a matter, but unfortunately the contemplation will only take you so far. But when you get into that deep state of meditation, when you're able to banish the mind and enter into that sea of consciousness from where we really come. And what is that? That is what I describe as the intuitive self. This is what Bertrand Russell himself about the intuitive self. And it will be amazing that the discussion we've had about this many times was late in the night. I'd be at his home. We'd be chatting, and he would ask me questions, but it always came back to what I had learned as a child of what intuition is all about. My father always said, follow your intuition, and you cannot be wrong. Reason is there for a purpose. After what we have gained from that intuitive knowledge, we bring it to the surface, and then we hold it up against the light, where we can apply reasoned judgments now, reasoned calculations, through logic and everything, all the physical attributes that we are given in the process of learning. But if we start with precepts, propositions, they are artificial. Even when we think that we can prove these, the big thing about that is currency. Cartesian model, I am, therefore. I think, therefore I am. But how reliable is the thing? And this was one of the big problems that came with the age of enlightenment. This whole Cartesian model became a subject for debate. Because I think, therefore I am, can only be so reasonably complete in so far as one breathes. But what one thinks in that sea of knowledge that's behind that, it becomes model thinking, as Bertrand Russell would say. So this is basically what this book is all about. How to see the world. And what I did is to examine now this concept of the intuitive self, intuitive knowledge, which comes from that element of what is called consciousness. We measure that now with how the Greeks see the world. How did they see the world? And my model there is Socrates. I critiqued it. It's very. Some people might say I might not fair here. I critiqued Plato and Aristotle to the point where I really felt they did not know philosophy. They may have had great minds in terms of presenting an argument, but that argument is fallacious insofar as what is real and what is not real. To me, the only person that was really a real philosopher was Socrates. And amazingly, what you might call the Stoics. Because who were the Stoics really? The Stoics were really those people who had contacts with the ancient rishis, or the knowledge of the rishis, the knowledge of the Upanishads. And that's why they live a life of the sadhu. And so they call them Stoics. Because they understood that their knowledge of the world is very limited. And unless we can really share with others who have experienced what I have experienced, then the whole argumentation becomes limited. So from there I went on to examine the major philosophers, Western philosophers, who were influenced by the Greeks, and I found a lot is lacking. And I came back now to where this knowledge comes from. So I examined the Upanishads, and I examined such thing as language. Language is so important to how we express ourselves. And this is one of the things Bertrand Russell had said to me. And later he said in a broadcast, when he made the statement, why I cannot be a Christian, he was taking a task. He said, you're putting words in my mouth that I did not say. You say I'm an atheist. I have never said I'm an atheist. It's just why I cannot become a Christian, because the whole doctrine of Christianity, from where I sit, has become very artificial in terms of the real substance of the divine. Unless we can get a language that can express that which we talk about when we talk about such things as the intuitive self, and to talk about the experience that we gain from that experience of meditation, then it is difficult to really present an argument that even philosophers can understand. So that's why he went on to symbolic logic. And the whole idea of a mathematics that would be crucial to express deep concepts in terms of what philosophy is. And that's where I so, I don't really have much time. I don't want to get Okay, so I'll go back
So,
to...
Balakrishna, can you talk a little bit more about this language, phonetics part of it?
Okay, that I dealt with that here. Phonetics, there's one very important Indian, I would call him a philosopher, but he was a linguist. And that linguist was Balakrishna. Balakrishna had also looked at some of the works of Yaksha, who was one of the first grammarians. And we had the development of Sanskrit, which, as we know, for a long time, even when the ancients were speaking that language, it was not recorded as such. So all for maybe 2,000 years or so, Sanskrit was not even expressed as a language, a written language. It was a spoken language. But the rules of speaking at that time was so absolutely confined that one had to be in tune with those people, and who were there? They were the yogis. Those were the rishis. And one of the things that started it all is this whole question of home. What is home? It is a phonetic expression of the divine. In one of the Upanishads it says home is God. Home is Brahman. How did they arrive at that? Because when we look at when Brahma first expressed that but he didn't express the earth. When he woke up from his meditation and he this sound was resonating throughout the universe. It infused his entire being. And then he found himself also chanting that. Just 3 syllables. Ah-mu-ma, ah-mu-ma, until we have. When you say it long enough, especially in a meditative way, it becomes more. But if you examine it in terms of the vibration, then that becomes a different process altogether. Because the Om is such a powerful sound, and this is where this whole concept of phonetics come into play. It comes in because until this time there was no such thing as phonetics. So we start talking about consonants, and we start talking about vowels, and we start talking about actual half a vowel, and then we talk about even less than half of a vowel, which now brings us into a state of consciousness with how that sound itself manifests. And that is why we find out that to talk about something, it might be easy to talk about it, but to sell that idea to someone and for that person to take it up and go with it is a different thing altogether. That idea has to be experienced. Om has to be experienced. This is why Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, in your last hours or even minutes of life on this earth, if you could hold that idea of Om, hum that Om to yourself by turning the eyes upwards and focusing it between the Ajna chakra. In that state of consciousness, you will come to me. That is the power of Om. Because Om equates with Krishna, it equates with Brahman, and it equates with the whole universal consciousness. So this comes back now to what the pre-Vedic people were actually doing. Their chants, the enchanting, that, and it were very, very, very small syllables, or very small vowels. As I say, some half of a vowel. But that half of a vowel is so powerful because that is the reality. In other words, we have to come down to that idea of Atman. And that Atman is so small that we may talk about it in terms of physics, particle physics and everything else, but it is not reality until you experience it. We have the collider in Switzerland, and they've been trying to really find out how small that particle is. And if they could do that, then we might have an idea to prove the existence of God. But that will never prove anything. Nothing will prove anything until you experience it. And whether we call it God or Brahman or Krishna, it doesn't matter. It's what you experience and you realize who you are, what this little substance is that's related to the rest of the universe. That is the finite example of when we speak about, when Bharatari talk about the idea of spota and shabda and dhvani. Those are principles of language that comes down to its finite elements. But those are the things that bring about truth. And that is philosophy. We're not talking about how to construct a language anymore. His idea was to go back to the origins of Sanskrit and from there come up with a formula for how we can be pure in our thoughts and expression. And that is important. Thoughts and expression. And when we load our thoughts with complicated ideas, with reason and logic, And semantics, then we really bifurcate the whole idea of what this whole concept of divinity is all about. And from that point of view, that aspect of divinity is no different from philosophy, because we're looking at a sense of reality now that it comes from the inner recesses of our inner being, which is part of the universal consciousness.
So now we will have a selected passage from the book read by Gary.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to allow me to read this today. It's quite the honor, and I believe I'm not the most fitting person to do it. But I am studying currently with Professor Sakupta Sanskrit, so I can hopefully read the scripture in its original tongue one day and further my understanding. But yeah, here today I'll be reading The Naked Philosopher, The Intuitive Self, the first section that is called The European Theater of Philosophy in Search of Meaning. Alright, I'll begin. I believe that the first time philosophy came to me happened in my 13th year while defending an essay I had written for my Form 2 junior college master. I was challenged to prove a point I had raised in my essay that the Catholic Church was corrupt from its very inception. It was a minor point stated in parentheses, but the master took me up to the principal of the college, who was a Catholic priest. The priest demanded that I either remove the parentheses or prove it without a doubt. All I had at my disposal in my small Indian village community in Trinidad was my personal copy of A History of Europe by H.A.L. Fisher, which was also the required history textbook used by the entire school. However, there was a reference to Spinoza's political treatise in the book, which gave me some hope. Baruch Spinoza's philosophy was dear to one of my uncles, who was the island's only Indian journalist at the time. And, after reading through my essay, he took down a worn volume from among his collection of favorite books and showed me Spinoza's theological political treatise. Among other things, I was struck by what Spinoza referred to as bibliolatria, the idolatry of the book, or an image contained in the book. This struck hard against what I was told by church authority that governed my school, or what we were urged to accept vis-a-vis Hindu and Judeo-Christian belief system. To accept that, while Hindus worshipped a plurality of gods, there was no idol worshipped among either Jews or Christians. Spinoza's idea of bibliolatry was not just a wild strike against Christianity, but for me it had struck directly into the heart of biblical inerrancy, the belief that the Bible is perfect, without error or fault in all of its teachings. To begin with, Spinoza denounced the belief that Moses was the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, which Christians call the Pentateuch, or what Jews call the Torah. Moreover, his analysis proved that the Bible was a compilation of texts written by many different authors and not revealed as one single continuous stream. The contention in my essay had to do with the kind of falsehood that Spinoza had condemned the Catholic Church. It also had to do with the zeal with which the Roman Catholic clergy proceeded in their mission to convert heathens to their cause of creating Jesus Christ as God in order to establish Catholicism as the one and only true religion. In this sense, the crusade started from the inner chambers of the papacy, which in time would reach everywhere. And, with the Bible in hand that claimed the authority of God, it prompted the new adherents to group together in a zealous force, capable of taking the new church even further than the former Roman Empire had gone, using paganist ideas to trap minds and souls of the unsuspecting converts. It was an easy ride for the new missionaries. perhaps the first since the dawn of history to create out an army of zealous believers for the sole purpose of capturing non-believers of the new faith to bring all and sundry into the ironclad net into the Catholic Church. Indeed, these zealots had learned much from the Buddhist monks 6 centuries before how to preach. But whereas the Buddhist monks preached and allowed their listeners to decide for themselves what they intend to do with the teachings of the Buddha, the Christian missionaries moved with their sword in the shape of the cross. Later, the Church, with its reformed Imperial Roman army now fitted out to serve Catholicism, would first turn its attention to the expansion of Christendom and then against the Mohammedans in the Holy Land, while aiming to convert or contain them even in their homelands. Of course, all of this culminated into the 200-year crusade, which was achieved through what Spinoza called bibliolatry and innamancy. Indeed, Spinoza was very clear about this, for in his Tractatus Theological Politicus, he clearly showed that where the scriptures were properly understood, it gave no authority for the militant intolerance of the clergy who sought to stifle all dissent by the use of force. Indeed, this use of force became the hallmark of the Church in dealing with all the questions that challenged its interpretation of the Bible. In fact, any dissent became intolerable and sacrilegious, which resulted in torture and the most painful form of death. There is little doubt that it was this intolerable use of force by the clergy that caused Spinoza to condemn the Church and all organized religions that depended on institutionalized interpretation of Scriptures, which he said in chapter 12 is in parts imperfect, corrupt, erroneous, and inconsistent with itself, and that we possess but fragments of it. Stumbling upon Spinoza did not only prove useful in arguing my case at junior college, but also served as a beacon of light in making sense about my own religious background. That while scriptures ought to be understood before they can claim obedience to faith, they should also be separated from the independence of philosophy. Indeed, it was here where I learnt the true meaning of Vedanta, traditionally referred to as the end of the Vedas. After all, as it were, I had been brought up with the Vedas, and although I was an ordained pundit at the age of 12, I knew very little about Vedanta, other than the meager idea that there was a body of knowledge appended at the end of each of the Vedas. This separate body of works, called the Vedanta, milk the Vedas to produce a different kind of knowledge that stands between the Vedas and the Upanishads. It is the real division between religion and philosophy, or religion and science, or religion based on faith rather than philosophy based on inquiry by virtue of intuitive knowledge. Another major perspective derived from reading Spinoza's Tractatus Theological Politicus was the undisputed understanding that, unlike Christians, Jews, and Muslims, Hindus have no central scriptural text that could put them in the category of bibliolatry. They accept all scriptures equal in value, but follow that one that is equitable to their soul's calling, which also explained for me the reason why there are so many religious sects among the Hindus. Each is free to worship according to the scriptures from which they give their obedience or faith. Indeed, they may follow different paths, but intuitively, they know that they would eventually arrive at the feet of the one's supreme reality, that which is above Prakriti, or nature, similar to Spinoza's cosmology of God and nature, and known by the wise, the knower of the Vedanta, as Brahman. At the end of each of the Vedanta, there is that collective body of knowledge known as the Upanishads. This is the filtered knowledge that, from the raw stuff of the Veda, derived from the wellspring of Hindu philosophy. Unlike Christian belief, it is above anything associated with pantheism or panentheism, or having any likeness to what Spinoza called bibliolatry. Here it takes the brightest of minds, with a commitment to truth, to seek true knowledge that comes not from pure reason, but from the deepest of trust in the intuitive self. Similar to Spinoza's critique of the Bible, it is here where Hindus can come to understand that real Word of God, or true religion, is not something written in books, but inscribed on the heart and mind of man. Of course, Spinoza's inscription had something for me with regard to separating religion from philosophy. It had the power to move religion away from blind faith and push the individual in this higher plane of consciousness to unite him with the ultimate reality in order to make him one with God and not subservient to God. This idea is akin to what Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. All of humanity is part of his lower nature, known as Prakriti, and comprising of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, the intellect called buddhi, and the I sense, or ego, called Hankara. This lower nature contrasts with Krishna's higher nature, known as the Purusha, which sustains the entire universe. At first there may seem to be an artificial divide between the higher and lower, and for some it might give credence for subservience of the lower to the higher. But, on closer reading of the text, we understand that Krishna wants just the opposite. The lower, inert side is meant to be enjoyed by all as a play of consciousness, in the same way of the rasa when Krishna dances with the cowherds to an uplifting fulfillment. Even so, just as the cowherds reached a state of bliss in the rasa dance with Krishna, they learned about their own higher nature in that sublime climax of discovery. In that moment, they were made new. The uniting of the lower and the higher by the unique and the exclusive sentient principle. Just as souls are being created, activated, and energized by the infinitesimal portion of the Supreme Lord, all creation is sustained by its own effort. As such, man is a part of Sri Krishna's lower nature, not doomed to serve the absolute God, but to serve man and nature in God. In this service, which comes with rising of consciousness and knowledge of the self, man can rise up and unite with the divine only by realization of his true self. Indeed, there is a formula for coming to terms with the idea of self-realization, which has nothing to do with the belief or religious rites. It is experienced in the inner working of the heart, which is the wellspring of consciousness from where real philosophy springs forth. In this regard, reason is the enemy of philosophy. It only plays a post-prescriptive role after the intuitive self has grasped the I aspect of the inner self, while experiencing the true nature of the individual person and its relationship with reality. Thus, it is only when the soul or self that realizes it is part and parcel of the reality that reason enters the fray of philosophy. From this point onwards, philosophy becomes one of reflection and contemplation, but reason takes on the role of grammar. Its purpose is to ensure that thoughts, ideas, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis flow smoothly without corrupting the wisdom experientially gained from the knowledge obtained through the intervention of the intuitive self. Thank you.
Unlike Spinoza's bibliolatry, the ambitiously but thoroughly scrutinized Veda Vyas text is thought to reveal the current meaning of the Vedanta Shastra. Even so, as revealed scriptures, nothing was allowed to pass down to Hindu civilization without scrutiny, even though there has been never a central authority in the form of an institutional organization of human beings such as the Church. For this reason, there has never been a schism among the vast numbers of religious sects organized under one of the four major Hindu groups known as Vaishnava, Saiva, Shakta, and Smarta. Under the Vaishnava sect, there are subgroups that are loyal to one of the 10 incarnates of Vishnu. According to the Linga Purana, there are 28 avatars of Shiva. However, the Satasvatara Upanishad mentions only 4, and Adaha Narasvara, the Lord who is half woman and half man, Rudras, of whom Rama is also claimed by Saivas, although claimed by Vaishnavas, Hanuman, the sage Agastya, the sage and philosopher Adi Shankara, and Ashwatthama are all accepted as bona fide avatars of Shiva. By contrast, the followers of Saktism are of 2 completely different persuasions. There are those who focus on the several consorts of Shiva as Devi, or goddess, in the role of divine mother, or even as mother of God, while others look upon her as cosmic energy. In the latter respect, as Shakti, she is equated as Brahman, the formless entity that comprises every single aspect of the universe. In this respect, she is not just the power that underlies the male principle as Devamata. She is the creatrix from whom everything in the universe flows, and as such, she is absolute Godhead. She predates the Vedas, but is mentioned at least 80 times in the Rig Veda as Aditi, both as mother of the gods such as Indra, Surya, Vamana, and more pertinently as the limitless one. Indeed, in the Valmiki Ramayana, Rama had to supplicate Aditi to get her blessings before embarking on his all-important fight with the most powerful earthly demon god Ravana. The act of supplication by one god before another may seem superfluous to anyone who understands the importance of Rama, in that he was not only regarded as an incarnate of Shiva, but also considered to be the 10th incarnate of Vishnu. From Vaishnava understanding, he was God on earth. However, a close reading of either the Tulsidas or Valmiki Ramayana clearly indicates that before man can rise to the status of God, he must demonstrate all the attributes of the perfect man. In this sense, Rama's supplication is the demonstration of Advaita, virtue of karmic duty, in the same way that Arjuna had to do his duty as instructed by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. In this sense, there is no contradiction in either the idea of one God supplicating before another God, or in the idea of Advaita Vedanta, where there is no duality between man and God, especially in the sense that Aditi, the Brahman, is formless and not an object of worship. The idea of supplication brought to Rama by Agastya Muni, one among the great sages of the time, is that Rama should recognize his lower nature, wrapped up in that bundle of matter, and merge in that state of divine consciousness known as Brahman or Aditi. Indeed, in the Valmiki Ramayana, Rama manifests here as Maryada Purushottama, the ideal man who rises to that of a divine being and does not bow down to supplicate Aditi. After all, Aditi is formless. He stands on one foot with his chosen arrow mounted on his bow as he recites from his heart a hymn praising Aditi given to him by the all-powerful Agastya Muni, the sage, also sometimes accorded the title of Avatar of Shiva. At the point where Rama should release his most powerful arrow, however, the arrow formally gifted to him by the archer of all archers, Shiva, Rama becomes frozen, at which time he becomes a mere observer. In the manner of speaking, Rama suddenly remembers himself and yields to the all-important Vedic directive. As God of all things,
become silent and allow man, embroiled in prakriti, to work out his problems. This idea is reminiscent of Krishna taking birth at the time when the affairs of man seem mindless in good conduct and laws governing dharma is waning. Here, Krishna's mission is to remove the recalcitrant spoilers and reestablish dharma, but he cannot act on his own. He must observe the old Vedic directive to which he later said in the Gita that were earlier established by him. Indeed, this was the reason why Krishna chose Arjuna, whom he must school before embarking in battle to restore dharma. Thus, while Rama remains frozen and cannot act by virtue of the old dharmic laws of laws, Sita, his consort, takes possession of her husband and manifests as the dharmic warrior against corruption in the combined form of Durga, as spoken of in this mantra, which I won't read. My Hindu is a little rough. The meaning of which is, O omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient one, she who conquers over all auspicious, the remover of darkness, the excellent one beyond time, the bearer of the skulls of impure thought, the reliever of difficulties, loving forgiveness, supporter of the universe, etc. However, flanked at the sides of his composite Sita, the consort of Shiva, that now bears 6 arms and the marks of the most powerful goddess in the Hindu Devi pantheon, are Vishnu and Surya to the right, and Shiva and Ganesha to the left. And between them is the larger-than-life Rama, frozen in time while gazing upon the entire battlefield that is about to consume almost all of the southern subcontinent in the fight against Ravana and his army that is recruited from as far away as Iran and Syria. To show how wide a sweep, parenthetically, the war with Ravana had engulfed the world, some biblical scholars claim that the Germans had descended upon the ancient Assyrians. Indeed, this was supposed to be Rama's battle, to cleanse the subcontinent of adharma and reinstate dharma. I should say adharma and reinstate dharma. But such a battle could not be done by one man alone, regardless how righteously divine that person might have been, as the problem that transcended the humble mind of individuals in societal setting. It required the cosmic energy of the Devi to penetrate all of Prakriti, the lower nature of the divine, to lift up and imprint on the individual souls the essence of that consciousness, which is part and parcel of the divine. In this way, the wholeness of Dharma would again be established, which would allow all of humanity to arrive at that state, the state where Rama had arrived, the man who discovers his divinity as the upholder of Dharma, and who thus rose up to be Maryada Purushottama, a perfect human being.
Thank you.
So, I was thinking about, so when you say that Stoics are pre-Socratic philosophers that people referring to philosophy. So you said that those people had, we are talking to rishis and people who had been working in India. But like people might wonder, like, I mean, in terms of when you say that experience is the real thing, that does not in any way depend on the knowledge of history, right? So what I experience now doesn't in any way depend on the knowledge of history.
No, they are historical. accounts of that. Plato talks about it. And the Stoics were very, one time they were very powerful. And as a new philosopher, the Stoics were pushed aside. And they were pushed aside for a simple reason, that people could not really communicate with them. Because what they experienced and what some of them wrote about their experiences. And in those experiences, we have allusions to the knowledge of the ancients Indians, called rishis. Now, in one of his Shakespeare, in one of Plato's poems, he wrote a dialogue with this particular philosopher who is in dialogue with what we call the seven rishis, what they call the seven wise men, which in English we call it the seven rishis. And there's in the 1600s, we have another man by the name of Baker who writes about that, and he goes into detail into who these wise men were, and he talks about the Sapta rishis as we know it from our Quranic records, also from our Upanishads. So it's not that there's no written language there. There is. But for some reason, this aspect of philosophy is not really taught at university. I taught for 15 years, and I knew most of the philosophers in philosophy. I had discussions with them, and I often asked, why don't you pass this in this area? Well, we don't think that there's a demand for it. Well, in the same way that you can make demand with marketing, you could do the same thing there.
So, I guess my question was that, so, I think it becomes very debatable point in who influences who. It's like the biggest debate in history. You know, like,
Yes.
people would say, oh no, who influenced the Christian theology and all of the meditative practices and everything. People will say, no, there were some pre-Socratic philosophers who went to India.
Right.
Then there will be an argument from the ancient Persian history that no, there will be some ancient Persian philosophers who influenced India and Greek both, and who were also some sort of ancestors of the Sufi philosophy. So this kind of debate, like who influences who, where does it mean? And second of all, is it necessary?
Well, I think it's
the knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's necessary so far. A good example is Pythagoras and Bodhiana. Bodhiana, we know, is a person who actually came up with the whole idea of geometry. Pythagoras went to India. He spent a lot of time in India. He got infused in the knowledge, and he came back and he started teaching it in Greece, and also in Egypt, and also in Iraq. And it became known as Pythagoras, right? Rather than where the source. It's only recently we started talking about Bodhiana.
Yeah, but there could be many other arguments which could be thrown on both sides. And when we talk about the real proof, like in terms of scientific proof, and then there will be some people who say, I will only accept the real texts who had historical references, and then some people will say, oh no, I will only accept as my intuition as my proof. So, and different people will accept differently, right? So, how can we say that, oh no, this is the real proof that this happened?
Well, okay, we come back to this question about real history, authentic history. In 1947, a great historian, British historian, he wrote this book, A Study in History. One volume of it, he wrote it to what he called conspiracy of history. That's Studie, Arnold Studie, one of the greatest historians of English historians. That caused a revolution of sorts in history. historical circles, history circles, in the continent, in England, and also in America. It was that history that people began to look at it, started to question how history is actually written. And this has been a problem. But whose history do you accept? Now, in the case of Bodleian, and in the case of and there are many, many others. One of the fundamental reasons why we say that it could not be Pythagoras is simply this. He had a formula, but he could never prove it. Okay? Historically, that's a fact. So, a person who writes a formula and doesn't know how to prove it, what do you say about it? Well, you go back to Bodleian, and Bodleian tells you how to actually do it. Step by step, he shows you how to actually do it. Now it is elementary among school children. One of the first things that a school child will learn is geometry. The hypotenuse triangle, right? And they will show you how to do it, but he couldn't do it. Why could he not do it? Because it was very obscure. This was a formula written down in sutra form of how to build altars for worship. This is where you see that everything about Hinduism has come down to, there are two sides to it. There is the practical application, because the formulas in the Vedas, but at the end of the Vedas we have the commentaries. This is where Upanishad, this is where philosophy starts coming. And you have a body of knowledge there, for many people is very obscure. Especially when you go to pre-written Sanskrit, which is what was actually raised earlier, pre-written Sanskrit. There's so much there that is actually philosophers and historians and linguists are still battling with, because they find it difficult to actually make sense of it. It's not that the knowledge isn't there. There are thousands and thousands of what you call the beliefs that was written that is still untapped. So they can always come down to the idea of who you accept as a historian, an authentic historian. And today we have the knowledge to tell who is and who's not. Right? Now it is true that some of the Indian history, because they never wrote history comes in the form of the Puranas. But if we read those Puranas very, very carefully, there's so much references to actually what historians will now go to as primary knowledge. Many historians, they don't even go through primary knowledge. How many historians will go through church records or letters and correspondence and try to come up with an idea, why did this happen? I know when I was doing history, we had to actually do that, because by that time, in terms of what Arnold Toynbee said about history, this became very important. If you're studying history, you have to examine primary stuff, church records, letters of correspondence, even bank receipts and everything else. And that gives you an idea. You know, basically, three universities have asked me for my archives. And you would be amazed at the kind of things that they want from me. In my travels, my invoices, hotels I stayed in, restaurant tips, travel documents. Because from here now, a person could look at those and say, yes, this man, really he was there, this is where he died, this is where he slept, these are the people who took care of him. And you do find that. You do find it. But how many people are willing to spend the time to examine them to come up with the authenticity that we're talking about? It's not that it isn't there, it's there.
Okay, with that, I'm sorry we'll have to end here. We want to thank Mr. Naipaul again